Over the last 2 generations, we've seen work culture change from the expectation of spending an entire career at one company to the average Gen Z person expecting to have 18 jobs across 6 different career paths before retirement, if they even get that lucky. This trend is also stretching the definition of what we consider a job in the first place, as gig work, side hustles, freelancing, and forced entrepreneurship are becoming increasingly common amongst people who would have otherwise filled regular 9-to-5 jobs just a decade earlier. In the process, this has been sold to us as liberating flexibility, tearing down the rigidities and formalities that went with the set 40-hour week. And in the interest of fairness, a lot of this is true. The mandate to be in an office between 2 set times a day has undeniably resulted in millions of wasted man-hours every year that could have been better spent if work only needed to be done when there was work to do. But the way we are fixing this has not been ideal. The rigidity of the 9-to-5 may have boxed us in, but it also offered a lot of people a level of stability that was hard fought for just outside of living memory. It probably won't come as a shock to you that the real motivation behind making everybody their own boss was not really so that they could set their own schedule. In fact, a look at the data would suggest that for a lot of people, it has actually done the opposite. But understanding why this happened will also shine a light on how we ended up getting the worst of both worlds, all while undermining the numbers we run our economy off of.
Small business, it's a busy time of year. As new data shows, retail sales jumped nearly 4% in the holiday shopping period from a year ago. That's according to MasterCard. But small business owners still face, we know, a host of challenges.
I paid him over $12,000 for one-on-one coaching.
I still wake up like very early. I'm like a 4:30, 5:30 person.
Oh, wow. My weddings right now start at $4,500.
I would expect no income anywhere between like 6 to 12 months.
More than 40% of the U.S. workers will be freelancers, independent contractors, or temporary workers.
When Uber started, $3,000 a week, $4,000 a week. And literally now, we are making like maybe like a quarter of it.
The gig economy has never exactly been flawless, but some recent trends are throwing off a delicate balancing act between workers and customers that might accidentally be exposing some much deeper underlying problems. On the surface, our unemployment rate looks really good right now. Sure, it has trended up slightly in the wake of a long string of mass layoffs, but by zooming out, we can see it is still hovering around all-time lows. Sounds great, right? Well, it's no secret anymore that jobs data has had some reliability problems in recent years, and one of the biggest blind spots is people moving into the gig economy instead of becoming formally unemployed. For a lot of people who have lost their jobs, it's quicker and often easier to register as an Uber driver than it is to register as unemployed, and you only really need to look at the numbers to see this is happening. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, over the last 5 years, the total number of people classified as unemployed has fallen by about 3 million, which sounds good, but over that same time frame, the number of active Uber drivers has increased by roughly 3 million people, according to company financials. Now, to play devil's advocate, even if these jobs aren't the best, having readily available and highly flexible work with low barriers to entry could actually be a good thing when the alternative is people going straight onto unemployment, and we will get to that. But the problem right now for the workers entering the gig economy is that there is a rapidly growing roster of drivers looking to chauffeur around a $50 burrito and a shrinking pool of customers that are still willing to pay for it. A lot of the data surrounding gig work and even just regular employment is disjointed, vague, and often downright counterintuitive. Even something as simple as what it means to be employed is probably going to be different for you than it is to the statisticians putting all of these numbers together. On top of that, when you think of gig work, you are probably thinking about people delivering food or driving people around in their fake taxis. But depending on which organization is collecting the data, it can also extend to renting out Airbnb properties or even people like little old me here running a YouTube channel. When a metric becomes a goal, it's no longer a useful measure, because the groups involved will try to influence it in a way that benefits them. The gig platform companies want to report that they have lots of people working for them to show how important they are to their stakeholders. The media wants big changes in job numbers one way or another to make for good headlines, and politicians want to ignore the industry altogether so that they can keep on pretending the job market is great. This just adds additional murkiness to an already very messy collection of numbers, which can make it really hard to see what is happening to a majority of the workers in these jobs, which is, let's be honest, mostly people who couldn't find a better job elsewhere. So to unravel this all, there are really 3 components that need to be understood: the fundamental platform economics that have facilitated the growth of the gig economy, what these services have covered up in the job market, and what happens when they can't cover it up anymore. Now that first point is really just about a balancing act. A platform like Uber Eats or DoorDash coordinates transactions between a service provider, the delivery driver, a goods provider, the restaurant, and a consumer, which is you poking at pictures of cheeseburgers on your phone at 11 p.m. If Uber Eats wants to make more money, it either needs to charge you more, pay their delivery drivers less, take a larger cut from the restaurant making the food, or just do more transactions in total. In the early days of these services, they were almost exclusively focused on that last point, expanding their user base. This meant that on any given transaction, they would actually pay more to the restaurant and delivery driver than they were taking off the customer just to attract as many of these three onto their platform as possible. Back around 6 years ago, when these businesses were still blitzscaling, customers would get subsidized food that was often cheaper than ordering in person, restaurants would get generous revenue splits, and drivers were paid well above minimum wage even after accounting for their hidden costs. But these good times were all financed by burning venture capital dollars. Now to play devil's advocate again, this is actually not that unusual when building out a marketplace. Customers won't spend money on the app if there are no restaurants to buy from, restaurants won't register on a platform that has no customers, and drivers won't make any money if there is no food to be delivered. So to get things started, the market maker usually does need to sweeten the deal in every direction. Nowadays, their mission has changed from growing the number of transactions to growing how much they make from those transactions. But how much they can push on each participant really depends on how hard they are to replace. All of these groups are still growing, but while total revenue from customers increased by around 35% in the last 2 years, the total number of active gig workers on the platform increased by around 80% over the same time period. This would mean that even if there were no changes in how this revenue was divided up, there is simply less money per driver even without considering inflation. But the real point here is that drivers have become the easiest group in this triangle to replace. So it's easier for Uber to cut costs from them without destabilizing their market. Now, I know that this is a lot of numbers to confirm what you probably already knew. Pay and conditions for the most common type of gig work is getting worse. But by understanding these numbers, you can see how this can very quickly become a dangerous feedback loop, especially if these customers can no longer justify spending twice as much on their food to have it hand-delivered across town. Now, maybe this could be written off as pure speculation from people who have spent too long looking at company financials, except for the fact that in a lot of markets, it's already happening, and the results have not been pretty. So it's time to learn how money works to find out what happens when there is no room left in the gig economy. This video is sponsored by Monarch Money, which has basically become my go-to place for keeping track of my finances. Monarch is private and ad-free, syncs with over 13,000 banks, credit cards, and investing accounts, and pulls everything into one clean dashboard. No ads, no data selling, you're the customer, not the product. In Monarch, I can see my spending, net worth, debt payoff, recurring bills, and even my credit score all in one place. The budget setup is flexible with simple rules and categories that keep things organized without feeling strict, and the insights help explain what is actually changing month to month. I use it during my monthly budget check-ins, and having everything synced into one view makes things feel way calmer and less overwhelming. I can get the full picture with a quick glance instead of bouncing between apps. If you share money with a partner, Monarch has a shared view so you're both looking at the same goals, bills, and overall financial picture. If you want your finances to feel more clear and under control, check out Monarch using the QR code on screen and use code HMW50 for 50% off your first year. Okay, so as the gig economy platforms are playing this little game, the perfect outcome for the company in the middle here, trying to maximize their own bottom line, would be a large group of people with a lot of disposable cash who are not very price sensitive, and an even bigger group of people over here without much negotiating power who just need whatever money they can get. And oh, would you look at that? It's a statistic you are probably all getting sick of hearing me repeat. The top 10% of households are now doing a record 50% of the spending, while the bottom 60% of households are doing a record low of just 20%. This growing divide is not great. But for a company like Uber, it's been a golden opportunity to squeeze more money for a worse service out of customers while simultaneously squeezing more service for less money out of its contractors. Also, let's be honest with ourselves. A lot of that gap is being bridged by pushing for tips harder as well. For the first 3 years of the company, they didn't even have a direct tipping option because the company itself called the practice tacky. Today, it's the expectation, and it's pushed very hard. First-hand reports from drivers and restaurants have backed up what the big picture numbers are suggesting. A lot of locations are doing record volumes of deliveries, but individual drivers are finding it increasingly hard to find consistent deliveries or rides, which means they can spend hours a day just waiting for an opportunity to work. When they do get jobs, it's clear that the platform is taking a larger share of the pie. Like this example of a $64 ride here in LA paying out just $12.43 to the driver. Of course, this is just one example, but it is a pretty damning one. Another factor that has allowed these companies to squeeze harder from every direction is interest rates. For a while, competition was actually quite fierce in the delivery gig workspace as dozens of regional startups tried to take market share away from the primary players. Today, most of them have either become the incumbents, been acquired by the incumbents, or they have gone out of business. The blitzscaling business model of burning billions of investor dollars until cementing market share only really worked in a low interest rate environment where it didn't cost much to just keep on piling in more cash. If a competitor wanted to enter the market today to offer a better service or pay gig workers more competitively, they would not only need to cover their operating costs while taking market share, they would also need to cover interest payments that would be 3 times higher than they were back when a lot of today's incumbents were doing the same thing. Now, where this could get really bad is what could happen if job losses continue. If even more people are forced into the gig economy, that would mean that even more people would end up competing for the same gigs, and that's without even considering that if people lose their regular jobs and end up delivering for Uber Eats, they won't have as much money to spend on Uber Eats. Now, this process alone is actually not that unusual. It's basically how every demand-side economic downturn ever happens. Businesses lay off people, so households spend less money, so revenue falls, so businesses lay people off. If anything, it could almost be argued that gig work like this offers an additional layer of protection to people who lose their jobs, which is kind of what is happening right now. The problem is that if this becomes widespread enough, it can cover up the problem for a lot longer than it would otherwise take to realize something might be going wrong. And if things do go very wrong, the gig economy offers far less friction for this loop to spin. Typically, businesses need to fill out a lot of paperwork to lay people off. It makes them look bad to investors, and they will also need to rework internal processes to operate with fewer staff. Yeah, sure, they still do it, but it's not an instantaneous or painless process. This means we at least have time to see something going wrong before it's a full-blown crisis. For gig workers, all of this can happen instantaneously and automatically through the algorithms. If the apps are getting fewer orders, drivers get fewer jobs and less surge pricing. The automated nature of their employment throws a bottle of baby oil into the mix anytime the economy loses its footing. Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, and companies like it are now collectively some of the largest employers in America. And if Uber drivers were counted as actual employees, it would individually be the largest employer in the world, easily beating out the largest defense departments and more traditional employers like Walmart. This is also just counting the people working in the largest and most obvious sectors of the gig economy. We have covered the story before, but starting around 5 years ago, there was a massive increase in the number of new businesses being registered in America. Now, spoiler alert, this was not because people suddenly became more entrepreneurial. It was mostly because people had lost their regular employment and were registering a company to do gig work. Fiverr, Etsy, Amazon Flex, and the naughtier platforms also saw a massive uptick in people selling their services. Even the number of videos uploaded to YouTube expanded significantly at this time, according to research published in the Journal of Quantitative Description, as people were looking for new ways to make money. And yes, this was just counting long-form content, as short-form would have skewed the results. The challenges faced by individuals working at the mercy of the gig economy are now well understood and well documented. But what we may soon figure out is that even for the people who never individually have to experience those conditions, they could still become a big problem for all of us. In fact, it's kind of already happened. China's gig economy might represent a glimpse into our own future, and that future is bleak. As a result of various factors, like headwinds from the real estate and financial industries, as well as a glut in recent graduates, the youth unemployment rate in China got so bad that the government simply stopped posting that data. Yeah. 2 years ago, when they did this, we were actually in a position to judge them for it. But anyway, these young workers, with few other options, have flooded into the gig economy, completely oversupplying the system with drivers. Today, according to estimates from The Economist, compiled from available company financials, there are 200 million gig workers in China, representing as much as 40% of their total urban workforce. This massive number is even scarier when you realize that just 15 years ago, these platforms didn't really exist at all. This has become a real problem in the last 3 years in particular, as already frugal Chinese households are cutting back on service spending due to faltering economic conditions. The end result is that gig workers have reported spending 10 hours a day waiting to earn as much money as what would have taken them just 3 hours in the past. Large groups of brightly colored riders waiting outside shopping malls have become a very visible sign of bigger issues impacting average people in an economy that, by the headline numbers, still looks like it's doing very well. Even workers who are active for 10 hours a day, 7 days a week, are still not earning enough to afford a dignified lifestyle in the country's major urban centers where most of this work is available. In some cases, competition for work has become so fierce that groups from opposing apps have gotten into altercations with one another on the street, and that is clearly not a sign of things going well. Now, we are still a little ways behind a similar situation in most Western countries, but there are not major structural differences that mean we couldn't. The point is that this should be a scary story with a lot of things that sound very familiar, which is not great. But it gets worse.
Rich people buy time, poor people sell time.
How many times have you heard some variation of this phrase? Don't sell your time for money. This is a finance bro way of saying don't make money exclusively from a source where you get paid X amount of dollars for Y amount of work, which is basically every job. There are various reasons given for why selling your time for money is a bad idea. Like you only have so many hours in a day you can work, so A, trading your time for money limits your potential income, B, trading your time for money also makes you more financially vulnerable if you are unable to work, and C, it's really hard to sell a course on trading your time for money unless you're a college. Although maybe don't say that last one out loud. The alternative to trading your time for money is usually investing, starting a business, living a wildly alternative lifestyle, or some combination of all three of these things. But I am here to tell you that while this very broad phrase might have some merit in specific situations, it's probably very much complete bullshit, and you really shouldn't take anybody who says it too seriously. At best, the phrase "don't sell your time for money" is just another example of hustle bros needlessly bashing on regular day jobs that provide stable living to a majority of Americans. It also perpetuates the idea that simply working a full-time job is not good enough, and that a side hustle or whole extra business is mandatory to get ahead these days. They might not be wrong, but we will get to that later. Most importantly, the thinking behind the line of "don't sell your time for money" is just wrong. Without being a trust fund baby, there really is no way to reliably make money without investing some time. And more importantly, trading your time for money can be a genuinely great way to build wealth, so as long as you're doing it correctly. An employer will buy an hour of time from an employee for a predetermined amount of money. This amount could be anything from minimum wage to hundreds of dollars an hour for highly skilled and very senior employees. I'm pretty sure you all know how jobs work, so why am I telling you about this in such basic detail? Well, because jobs are not the only way that we sell our time for money.
Sorry about that.
People will often spend hours clipping coupons, avoiding toll roads, and spending their weekends trying to sell used junk from around their house to make a few extra bucks, without realizing that the time they spent doing this was worth a lot more than the money they made, or saved. If they were doing this to have more money in their pocket at the end of the month, then they would have been better off picking up a few extra hours at work. I get it, some people work fixed schedules and don't have the option to pick up more work on a whim. But we have already seen that gig work has exploded in popularity, so that could offer an alternative. If you're a high-income earner, gig work might struggle to match your regular income, but then clipping coupons is likely to put you even further behind, and so will most other activities for that matter. Amongst financial professionals, there is a type of investor called the sophisticated idiot. A sophisticated or accredited investor is someone who has more than $1 million in assets outside of their primary residence, or earns more than $200,000 a year. American financial regulators have decided that people making this kind of money are smart enough to have enough financial security to make riskier, less regulated investments. Medical professionals, like doctors and dentists, fall into the sophisticated idiot category all the time, because they frequently make big investments that take up a lot of their time. A dentist developing an apartment complex might be able to make a lot of money, but investments like this can take hours of planning and oversight. Even if they are successful, they often walk away with less money than had they just taken on a few more cases and stayed in the operating room. Doctors and dentists are very smart people, but because they don't think they're selling their time for money, they often undervalue the money they could have made if they weren't trying to make passive income. Now, if you love flipping properties, selling stuff on Craigslist, or seeing how much money you can save at Walmart with your coupons, then by all means go ahead. But just remember, if you are only doing this to save money, then you are just selling your time for money in a different way, and probably not getting a great price for it in the process.
What do you want from me, man?
People not realizing that they are always going to be selling their time for money also make the exact opposite mistake to this. They overvalue their time. There are things you could do right now that would only take an hour and would save you a lot more money than you would make in an hour at work. renegotiating insurance, utilities, and mortgages, canceling subscriptions you never use anymore, or applying for a new credit card with a sweet sign-up bonus. All of these will take a bit of time, but will put much more money back into your pocket than doing an extra hour in the office.
Because you waste time on things that never pay you.
This segues us nicely into the next reason why you should sell your time for money. It's going to be a better way to invest for a lot of young people. There are investments that are more passive than others. For example, if the doctor would have just used their money to buy a bunch of dividend stocks, then it would have likely only taken them a few hours to do some research and make the purchase trades to get a well-balanced portfolio that will pay them for decades to come. If a dentist could earn $1,000 an hour while practicing, and it took them 5 hours to consult with a financial planner that charged them another $1,000 on how to structure a $1 million stock portfolio, then the dentist would need to make up $6,000 for this to have been a good use of their time. A $1 million portfolio should return between $50,000 and $100,000 per year over the long term, so it would take roughly a month for the dentist to get ahead on this investment. This was a good way for the dentist to sell their time for money, and that's using very generous figures for how much that dentist could make at their practice. But the math doesn't work like this for most people. Most people earn much less, but also have less to invest. A regular professional making $15 an hour with $1,000 to invest really shouldn't overthink things. Even if they make phenomenal returns of 100% per year by day trading using techniques they picked up from some totally legit guy on the internet, that's still only $1,000 a year. And before you start talking about compounding returns in the comment section, may I remind you that the greatest hedge fund of all time only made 60% annualized returns before fees. So if you really think some random guy is going to make 100% annualized returns after watching a tutorial from some random guy on the internet, then I have truly failed to teach you how money works. Anyway, the problem is that because working for money gets such a bad rap, and passive income is continuously held up as the holy grail of financial success, a lot of people choose to make small investments with money that would have been way better spent increasing their earnings power. $1,000 can pay for qualifications to do a lot of jobs that pay significantly more than minimum wage. Now, I'm not talking about online courses or college degrees. I am talking about real work qualifications to do work that requires specialized training. If you have some technical skill, a coding bootcamp can get you an entry-level job as a software engineer. It might not be Google, but you could still be earning a lot more than minimum wage, plus the passive income from a $1,000 stock portfolio. Working on acquiring qualifications and marketable skills is not as sexy to most people as picking the next Tesla, but it's a much more reliable way to make money. And hey, once you are selling your time for more money, you can use that extra money to work on building passive income. But maybe you want to speed up this process by starting your own business. Well, then understanding that you are always selling your time for money is going to be even more important. In my career as an investment banker, I've been lucky enough to talk with a lot of successful company founders about what made their business work. Starting a business is always going to take a lot of time and energy, and as an early founder, you will need to accept that you are going to basically be doing everything, from the sexy stuff like product design and marketing to the boring stuff like accounting. As a business grows, a big mistake that a lot of business owners make is either trying to continue to do everything themselves or delegating away everything but the fun stuff. A business can only get so large before it can no longer be operated by a single person, and letting go of something that you control can be hard. The finance gurus are absolutely right when they say that you need to leverage other people's time and experience to scale a business, but this isn't the excuse to forgo the boring stuff either. If a business owner has a background in design and no experience at all in business management, then they should hire a business manager to delegate the day-to-day operations of the business to them, because their time is better spent designing new products. Similarly, if a business owner has a decade of experience as an operations executive and no experience whatsoever as a designer, they should hire a designer and delegate that work to them, even if they think they would have more fun thinking of cool new products. Understanding that you are always selling your time for money will really help you if you decide to go into business for yourself, because it will always remind you to stick to the tasks where you are worth the most, and delegate the tasks that you can't do to a professional standard even if you really want to. Despite the few stories of college dropouts starting billion-dollar companies, the average age of a billion-dollar founder is 47 years old, and that's because they spent decades in a career that gave them skills, which meant they could leverage their time to build a company worth $1 billion. So if selling your time for money is not such a bad plan, then why does every personal finance bro on the internet shit on it so much? Even the infallible Warren Buffett has been quoted saying that if you don't make money while you sleep, you will never be wealthy.
Oh, damn!
So are all of these guys wrong? Well, not really, but they aren't getting to the point I think they're trying to get across very well. And they are definitely reading their audience all wrong. Let's start with Warren Buffett. I struggled to find an instance of him actually saying this quote, so it's entirely possible that someone falsely credited him with this line and everybody else on the internet just went with it. But that doesn't matter. He has definitely said some similar things at one of his many talks. Anyway, he is totally correct. Wealthy people should have passive investments that make them money while they sleep. But that doesn't mean that the best way they become wealthy is by focusing on those investments. It's a classic rich people eat caviar, but eating caviar won't make you rich scenario. When Buffett gives his speeches, he's normally talking to rooms of Berkshire investors, or people that could afford to attend an event that Buffett was speaking at. They are by and large already selling their time for lots of money, so passive investing is the next step. Nobody is reasonably choosing between a $250,000 investment in Berkshire and a course that can make them an extra $20 an hour. Now, as for all the other financial influencers on the internet, at least 50% of them are just saying that earned income is trash and passive income is the bomb because they want to sell you a course on how to make passive income. I don't think anybody should be surprised by scams and dubious claims on the internet anymore. But what about the other 50%? The other 50% of people making personal finance content really are trying to do their best. But financial content given to a general audience can only be so good because, well, it's general advice. Invest into a portfolio that will make you passive income is not bad advice. And yeah, eventually, if you want to retire, you will need most of your money to come from a source that requires very little time input. The problem is that broad statements like this perpetuate the idea that making money one way is inherently good and making money another way is bad. This good advice makes no considerations for someone's age, qualifications, income, existing assets and liabilities, obligations, time horizon, and goals. You shouldn't watch a Dr. Mike video instead of getting a checkup, so you shouldn't watch a Graham Stephan video in lieu of making a personalized plan for improving your own personal financial situations. Unfortunately, not everybody can make money for doing nothing. The world does need people to work. No matter what you do, you are always going to be selling your time for money. It's up to you to make sure that you do everything you can to make the hours in your day a highly sought after and marketable product. Nobody gets home from a long day in the office and thinks to themselves, I can't wait to drive drunk people home from the bar or deal with customer complaints on my eBay store. No. People need side hustles, and if they are lucky, they have convinced themselves that they don't totally hate them. You have probably heard platitudes like, in order to be successful, you need multiple streams of income, or nobody ever got wealthy off a 9-to-5. And these ideas really support the idea of getting out there and working on something more than your career. Side hustles and hustle culture in general might look harmless. After all, what's the problem with motivated individuals doing a little bit of extra work to put some more money in their pockets? Maybe side hustles can do some good, and I promise I will look at some examples that do genuinely make some sense in this video. But as always, my main goal is to try to ruin a good thing and show you that this push to normalize and incentivize side hustles is something we probably shouldn't be too excited about. Now, a side hustle should ideally be able to accommodate 4 important parameters. It has to make money, otherwise it's just a hobby. It has to be doable outside your regular working hours. It has to be something you have the expertise and resources to accomplish, and if it accomplishes this, then why not make it your full-time job? Conveniently, these requirements give a would-be side hustler a checklist of very important questions they should ask themselves before starting out, but I am getting ahead of myself now. Let's start with the first one. Most side hustles are just very small businesses, and making money in business is surprisingly difficult. There is a reason why most of them fail. You can go for the easy options like driving for Uber, and you will be guaranteed a basic level of income so long as you pick up rides as they become available. But there are obviously problems with this system. You will be giving a fair chunk of your income away to the company that facilitates this work, and even if you do fully commit yourself to driving in your off hours, the income you receive from doing this is likely going to be lower than most regular jobs after factoring in additional insurance and the extra miles you put on your car. I have already made an entire video about the shortfalls of starting a business with apps like Uber, so I won't dwell on these for too long, and instead I want to look at side hustles that are more self-driven. Flipping things in online marketplaces, consulting, or doing chores like gardening are other popular options that give you the opportunity to make money without an app-based middleman. Let's go with something very simple, like mowing lawns for your neighbors on the weekend. This can make money, so it passes the first test. It's also done outside of regular working hours, so it passes the next test. And you might think that you wouldn't need much expertise and resources to set this gig up, but you might be surprised. Most lawns only need to be cut once every 2 weeks, which means if you want to make this a consistent hustle, you are going to need more than just a lawnmower and a gallon of lemonade. Before you start making any money, you are going to need to go door to door asking people if they want their lawns mowed. It sounds easy, but going door to door to sell something is a terrifying experience for 99% of people. And even people confident enough to do it would be surprised how hard it would be to find enough people to agree with your services to make wasting your weekend worth it in the first place. And yes, before you write about it in the comment section, I did have a job for 3 weeks doing door-to-door sales in college. Please don't hate me. Anyway, let's say you are made of the right stuff to go out and drum up business for your weekend lawn mowing gig, and it goes so well that you are fully booked out mowing lawns. You have to ask yourself the question of why you don't just make this your new full-time job. If you make more money at your regular job, then perhaps you would have been better served just doing some overtime. If overtime isn't a thing in your office, then perhaps finding a part-time weekend job in the same field would work for you. If you do make more money mowing lawns, then maybe your answer to this question is that you just don't want to mow lawns for more than 1 day a week. That's fair, but then why the hell are you doing this to yourself? If you enjoy mowing lawns less than your day job, then you have just signed yourself up for some well-paid torture. But there is a solution to this, which is to focus on where you added the most value in your hustle. In this example, that would be in the door-to-door sales. If you didn't hate that, then you would be best focusing on and pursuing a career in sales where you can just focus on where you're good at without a need to push a lawnmower around all weekend. Of course, this is just one example amongst the plethora of different side hustles available to you. So don't take this as career advice on building your lawn care empire. But instead, let it demonstrate that most value comes from specializing in one thing and then doing that thing extremely well. An extremely good salesman who spends most of their time pushing around a lawnmower is not going to make as much money as an extremely good salesman who focuses on closing deals. A website developer will on average make more money building websites all day than they would by building their own website to try and sell socks online. This advice goes directly against what you might have heard about most millionaires having 7 different sources of income. So who's telling the truth here? Well, this claim originally comes from a 2002 study published by the IRS, which tracked 6,053 wealthy individuals who had died between 1996 and 2002. The study looked at their tax returns and found that these millionaires had 7 distinct forms of income: investment income, earned income, rental income, royalty income, capital gains, profits, and interest income. Immediately, you can start to see the problem here. Most of these income types are simply the result of being rich to begin with, not from going out and #grinding. The study also showed that most people built their wealth by building one business or focusing on one highly compensated career, which they could then use to buy up assets that would provide these other income streams. The claim that the average millionaire has an average of 7 income streams is also pushing the wording of this report to the level that it's an outright lie. Only 29% of millionaires in this study reported 5 or more streams of income, with the majority having just 3. Still impressive, but it's not out of the ordinary for a wealthy person to have a job, get some dividends, and earn some money from interest in a savings account. This rather disappointing reality is a far cry from what some people might want you to think when they say this phrase. But I'm sorry, nobody really gets rich by doing half a dozen jobs. There is also one other problem with drawing any conclusions from this study, which is becoming a common theme for this channel, and that is selection bias. This study looked at people that died between 1996 and 2002. Most people die when they're old. Older people, especially rich older people, have had more time to accumulate assets to diversify their income away from their primary earned income. Most of you watching are a long way from death, hopefully. And 99% of people that achieve massive financial success at a young age do it by maxing out one income stream. Or, getting a nice inheritance. That works too. So, if the common belief about multiple income streams is not true, why then do you see it repeated everywhere? The cynic in me wants to say that a lot of people spouting this nonsense have some kind of hidden interest in selling you a course or something on building out your next income stream. And that's definitely part of it, but honestly, I think that most people that perpetuate these ideas are people who genuinely need to believe it's true. Young workers have never known a world with the level of job security, career progression, and opportunities available to the generations that came before them. Having a backup form of income in case you get fired out of the blue one day no longer sounds like doomsday prepping, it's just prudent advice. I am also well aware of people that need multiple gigs to support themselves and their families because they don't receive enough income from their main job. But to be fair, this should be called what it is, which is working multiple jobs. To call what someone is doing in these situations a side hustle is just sugarcoating a shitty situation. The 9-to-5 was invented so we wouldn't have to work multiple jobs just to get by. But that was a different economy, one built around manufacturing and physical labor. You're probably not doing that anymore. So why are we still living by the same schedule? The 9-to-5 was created by American labor unions in the 1800s and became mainstream over 100 years ago, when jobs looked like this and this. It was revolutionary for its time. But how many of the modern problems in corporate America are caused by trying to make an outdated system fit with every single modern job? A report by the management consulting firm McKinsey & Company found that 2/3 of the average human's wealth is in the work they can do over their lifetime. Everybody has time, effort, and experience they can trade for money, and those tradable commodities are worth twice as much as all the other assets that the average person possesses. A regular 9-to-5 job has been a great way for billions of people to safely exchange a predictable amount of their time for a predictable paycheck, with predictable career advancement as they gain more experience. But this one-size-fits-all model for work doesn't fit with every job, and trying to make it work has been bad for employees and bad for companies for 3 reasons, which is causing 3 equally terrible trends in the job market. The first trend is that it makes time a worthless asset. The Ford Motor Company was one of the first businesses in America to adopt the 9-to-5 40-hour work week. Henry Ford did this to make his company the most attractive place for auto workers to get a job. This allowed him to pull talent away from other automakers without paying his workers more. In order to compete with Ford, other automakers were forced to offer the same 40-hour work week with paid overtime. Eventually, in order to compete with the automakers, other companies were also forced to offer 9-to-5 jobs so that their best workers didn't quit and go and work on the car assembly line. These auto workers had tightly defined and repetitive tasks, so unless the workers succumbed to exhaustion, they could do a consistent amount of work for every hour they spent at their post, and every additional hour would produce the same amount of output. If you work in a modern office job, you will know that your work is nothing like this. Sometimes there is a lot to do, and sometimes there is nothing to do. But you still need to be there 8 hours a day looking busy no matter what. Back when the 40-hour week was being fought for by workers' unions, most Americans worked in manufacturing. But today, most people work in the services sector, which is more diverse than you might expect. Unless you are working on a farm or in a factory, you are a service worker, and your job could be anything from making strategic corporate decisions to making coffees. Clearly, these jobs are very different, and should have a different schedule. But most of the corporate world has tried to make the 9-to-5 fit all jobs. But this doesn't work, because no service jobs have tasks consistently delivered on a fine-tuned production line. Work comes and goes as internal and external customers make demands, and that means when people are busy and need to do more than 8 hours in a day to finish their work, they are expected to work, quote, reasonable unpaid overtime. According to an ADP Research Institute study of office professionals, unpaid overtime jumped to an average of 9.2 hours per week in 2021, more than a full extra day to keep up with employer demands. But when there is little to no work to do because a project has just been completed or sales are seasonally slow, workers are still expected to put in the 40 hours a week because that's what the business is paying them for. If you're in this kind of job, your best option is to try and find something that makes you look busy. But if you don't have something to work on, you are probably going to be given meaningless tasks just to fill the mandatory 8-hour day. If this was just another story about companies screwing over their workers with outdated business practices, it wouldn't need a video. But the 40-hour work week isn't even good for companies. According to data from the US Census Bureau, McKinsey & Company, and compiled by Statista, growth in gig work and freelance jobs have outgrown typical permanent jobs by 500% over the last decade. Gig work apps have become very popular with unskilled workers due to their low barrier to entry and flexible working arrangements. Someone with a phone and a bike can start working for a food delivery service like Uber Eats, Postmates, DoorDash, Grubhub, or all of them all at the same time in less than an hour by filling out an online form. This has been a highly appealing alternative to minimum wage jobs that still rely on the antiquated process of handing in a resume, spending weeks doing job interviews, only to still get ghosted by a fast food joint offering $7.25 an hour for an unpredictable schedule. Gig work jobs usually also pay terribly, but people get to work as much as they want, when they want, and they can work around another full-time job for extra money. Even with all of the problems of gig work, you can see why it has become so popular. The popularity of freelancing and private contracting has also exploded. This is more popular among skilled workers who can sell their services to businesses just like an employee, but with no ongoing agreement. They are only paid when there is work to be done. Private contracts are usually an agreed-upon price for an agreed-upon outcome, like $10,000 to build a company website, but they can also be billed hourly for roles like security, administrative assistants, or on-demand workers. According to a report by the management consulting firm Oliver Wyman, healthcare workers have been one of the fastest-growing groups of workers ditching typical permanent roles in favor of working as private contractors. On-call nurses, doctors, and hospital support staff already work unpredictable hours, so they don't sacrifice much by working as contractors instead of a direct employee. According to the report, some nurses have elected to work in the temporary staffing market so they can take on fewer hours, as mental health has become a top priority for workers in the industry. Private contractors in all industries are usually paid more for their time than permanent employees because the business only pays for the hours of services they actually need, which means most of the time their total out-of-pocket will be lower. With mass layoffs dominating the news cycle, people are also finding out the hard way that if they work in an at-will employment state, their 9-to-5 doesn't give them much security anyway. So, workers at all skill levels are seeing they can make more, and businesses are realizing they can cut down on expenses by doing away with the rigid 9-to-5 workday, which is the second reason it's slowly becoming a relic of corporate history. But the death of the 9-to-5 is not going to be a good deal for everybody. Unfortunately for now, businesses are going to be the biggest winners out of this shift, even if they have to pay their contractors and gig workers slightly more per hour. The first loss is benefits. If you work as a private contractor, you are becoming your own boss, which means that even though you are making more money, there is overhead that you become responsible for. Benefits like paid time off, training, retirement plans, accounting, and health insurance are going to come out of your pocket. Health insurance through a regular employer is normally far more affordable than private options. For gig workers, this can be especially tough, because health insurance premiums for people who ride motorized scooters through late-night traffic to deliver food to people's homes is simply unaffordable on the income of a delivery driver. Even if you are doing highly skilled contracting, if you don't manage these expenses carefully, you will end up with less in your pocket than if you just stuck with a regular permanent position. And your loss is their gain. According to a survey conducted by Forbes, small and medium enterprises were hiring more contract workers because it simplified their accounting and reduced the ever-increasing expenses of human resource management. It's not just small companies either. According to CNBC, contract workers have outnumbered direct employees at Google and other large tech companies since 2018, and the ratio became even more skewed during COVID. Google already has large human resources and accounting departments, so they are pursuing contract work for two other reasons. The first is that the most talented engineers have realized that they can make more money working off one-off projects for lots of companies than they could by being a full-time employee with just one company. The demand for talent during the good times meant that these companies just had to pay what these top engineers were asking. Some highly specialized engineers could bill up to $10,000 an hour for their work to these companies. Even for a company as rich as Google, it was better to pay them only for the hours. They really needed them, instead of paying them millions of dollars a year as a permanent salary for the odd project where their skills would be needed. The second reason is that during bad times, like right now, getting rid of contractors doesn't count as layoffs, so companies can easily cut expenses without technically laying off any staff. Big layoffs signal to investors and other employees that the business is in a bad shape, and that they would be better off investing their money or building a career somewhere else. There are three groups that are really going to benefit from the death of the 9-to-5. But their gain is all at the expense of one big group that statistically you are a part of, the regular workers. Entry-level workers who can get gig work are not paid well, but they weren't paid well in minimum wage jobs either. They have just gained some flexibility to work when they want. High-skilled workers who can move to contract roles can make a lot of money by working for the highest bidding company. They only lost the idea of job security that never really existed for them anyway. Companies are also taking full advantage of the death of the 9-to-5 by cutting down on their biggest expense center. The losers are regular workers right in the middle who are in roles that can't be gigified but aren't in demand enough to be contracted out. The fixed expenses of operating as a contractor, health insurance, business licensing, accounting, and everything else means it's only worth it for people earning well over the average wage. If you are earning $60,000 as a permanent employee, you would have to charge $80,000 a year as a contractor to break even. And not many businesses are going to pay that $20,000 premium for a standard job. New regulations intended to protect contractors and workers are another problem. If a contractor files for unemployment after their job is completed with a company, they can file an SS-8 form with the IRS, which can trigger an audit to determine if that contractor and other contractors working for the company meet the requirements to be counted as a permanent employee. If they do, then the company has to cover their unemployment benefits and has to provide other benefits to every other contractor in the business as well. Businesses don't want to take that risk, so they use staffing agencies to handle all the compliance for them. According to data from the American Staffing Association, most contractors now work through middleman staffing companies. For contractors working through these middlemen, it can combine all of the problems of permanent employment with none of the benefits of being a private contractor. And that's the third reason why the 9-to-5 is going extinct. It lets companies pull some creative business maneuvers. Of course, big companies are going to use every dirty trick in the book to avoid additional costs. Then you might be thinking it would be better to be more like Europe and have a lot more small businesses so the big businesses don't have as much leverage. Well, we've been doing that, but it's not exactly what it seems. Small business is the backbone of our economy, or at least that's the story. Entrepreneurs taking a chance on themselves to start a business have provided employment to millions of people, created innovative products and services that you enjoy every day, and in return, they can achieve levels of financial success that would be impossible with almost any regular old day job. You would be silly not to give it a go at least once in your life, right? Well, that message has been heard loud and clear by millions of people, because if you look at the numbers, it would seem we are living through a golden age of new entrepreneurs. There are now twice as many new business applications being processed every month than there were before the pandemic. Politicians on both sides of the aisle have been quick to take credit for this trend as the personification of the American dream. Unfortunately, this record-setting business creation has made a lot of people very angry, because those new businesses are being started by poor people. So instead of being an indication of a thriving business environment, it's instead a sign of everything wrong with our economy, if you believe the numbers. So new businesses being formed is normally a really good sign that the economy is doing well. People normally only start a new business when they feel confident about their future and the future of the market they want to operate in. If you thought a recession was all but guaranteed and you weren't sure how you were going to pay your bills next month, you probably wouldn't be starting a business. Lots of new business creation is also a sign that people have achieved a certain level of financial security. Starting a new business often means making some significant upfront investments into renting some commercial space, buying equipment, purchasing inventory, and for a lot of businesses, hiring some staff. Most new business owners should also expect to go for some time without taking any income while their business builds up sustainable cash flows. This means if lots of people are starting businesses, lots of people are in a comfortable enough financial position to bear these costs. Lots of new businesses is also more than a sign that things are going well. They actually make things go well. New businesses create employment for people who just want a job, and they improve productivity in a few ways. Business owners, especially new business owners on average, will put in more time and effort working for themselves than they would in a regular day job. This means they're making more output than they would be if they were just working a 9-to-5. New businesses can also become successful businesses that bring valuable products or services to market. If you start a business-to-business company that develops a new type of software that streamlines AI-generated LinkedIn appreciation posts, then you could save millions of wasted man-hours across the country, which means workers could actually do something better and more productive with their time. Likewise, if you start a business selling a consumer product, it could add competition to the market for similar products, or if you develop a new product altogether, it could make people happier, healthier, smarter, or just keep them entertained. Of course, most new businesses fail. But for society at large, the few that succeed are usually a good thing. So then why is this record level of business creation in America not exactly great news? Well, there are actually 3 reasons. The first is simply why these businesses are being started. A 2023 paper by Ryan Decker of the Federal Reserve Board and John Haltewanger of the University of Maryland found some interesting patterns with these new businesses. The first was that these new businesses were largely being formed in states and counties with lower average incomes. Now, most counties saw an increase overall, but the outskirts of cities, particularly hard-hit states, outpaced the rest by a significant margin. The authors of this paper suggested that a lot of this business formation was just existing businesses closing in city centers that didn't see much foot traffic and reopening in suburbs where the rent is lower and they can cater to a market of people working remotely. This wouldn't actually really increase business activity because it's just moving it around from one place to another. But closed businesses can stay registered for a long time after they physically shut down. Now, this move to the burbs might not actually be doing any good, but it's not doing any harm either. Unfortunately, it doesn't account for the entirety of this trend. And a lot of the other people starting a new business aren't doing it to follow their dreams. They are doing it because they have no other option. And it's probably making things much worse than we realize. So actually figuring out how our economy is going is something that our governments really struggle with. Collecting data on hundreds of millions of people, millions of businesses, and billions of transactions is actually really hard. So they often make some calculated guesses based on historic patterns. As impractical as it would be for the Bureau of Labor Statistics to scrape every job posting off Indeed and look through every classified section to find new jobs being created, it wouldn't even be that accurate. The rise of ghost job listings means that there are almost twice as many job postings as there were 5 years ago. But as anybody who has tried to get a job in the last 24 months will tell you, businesses aren't exactly in a rush to hire. That's a problem, because government agencies use job creation data to make very important budget and interest rate decisions, so we really shouldn't be making shit up. One of the other historical assumptions has been more business creation equals more job creation. Businesses need employees, so this makes sense, except the data has actually started saying the opposite. In the report on the rise in new business applications, Decker and Haltewanger found that counties with a higher rate of business creation were actually correlated with a higher rate of job destruction. This data really just confirmed what a lot of people already suspected. People weren't starting businesses to take advantage of some amazing opportunity. They were starting them because they had no other choice. According to a broad market survey, 36% of the American workforce is now engaged in the gig economy. Some of these people are doing this in conjunction with their regular day job as a way to earn extra money. But whatever the exact details, that is still a significant increase from just 5 years ago. Gig workers are encouraged to register a business and keep track of their revenue and expenses just like any other business. But unlike other business, none of these people are going to be hiring employees or investing a lot of money into the broader economy. In the past, people starting a new business usually had a bit of experience in their field and a bit of cash in their pocket to get their business set up. At the very least, they had some investors that were willing to trust them with upfront capital to get their idea off the ground. Most of these new gig economy businesses today are started by people without enough experience to land a job and without any cash at all. Now, it's not all bad. For a lot of people, being able to sign up instantly to perform work in the gig economy instead of going through the outdated hurdles of job interviews is a big reason why these platforms have become so popular. But these jobs also shouldn't be sugar-coated. They are insecure, don't pay well, and are quite dangerous. This technology is truly unprecedented, and in the short term it has existed, it's already reshaped what we think of as work. It's really up to you if it's been for better or worse though. So you might think this is just another example of a slow government struggling to keep up with changes in technology that have redefined the labor force. But there are two reasons why government agencies have tried really hard to intentionally ignore this trend. The first reason is that headlines about job creation and business development are great for re-election. Nobody wants to be in charge when the data collectors change their methodology and reveal that millions of jobs we thought exist actually don't. The second reason is that it makes it look like big programs are actually working. Late last year, the Small Business Administration made a press release bragging about the success of a business loan program made to minorities. In it, they highlighted how previously underrepresented groups had been starting a record number of businesses. Now, before a whole big thing starts in the comments, yes, these loans probably should have been made based on socioeconomic need, but statistically, they show the same thing anyway. The Small Business Administration thought they had successfully empowered a new group of business owners. What they had actually done was just record these groups registering for Uber Eats. Even highly skilled workers with a lot of experience have not been immune from this trend either. The number of people working as independent contractors jumped significantly as businesses moved away from full-time hires and the worker protections that came with it. Typically, independent contractors should have the freedom to work when and where they want as long as they deliver the agreed-upon product or service within the agreed-upon timeframe. But a lot of businesses have not so subtly mandated that their contractors be in office just like any normal employee, just without the security or benefits. A study by the National Employment Law Project found that a lot of these independent contractors were forced to sign non-compete agreements as part of their contract. This meant they had all the independence of an employee combined with all the safety of someone in business for themselves. Now, for certain people, especially those at the top of their field, being an independent contractor is a great opportunity to provide services to multiple different companies and charge a much higher hourly rate than 9-to-5 employees ever could. These kinds of private contractors didn't suddenly become twice as common though. Most of this growth is simply explained by people working full-time jobs with contractor conditions. It also means that job opportunities aren't as plentiful as the numbers would suggest, because even if lots of new jobs have actually been created, they are likely being worked by someone who already had a job and just needed a second or third source of income to keep up with living expenses. Now, I know for a lot of you watching, you already know this, but ignoring this issue will probably end up making it worse. These charts aren't just here for me to make depressing videos every week. They should inform policy. If we can't even acknowledge a problem, it makes it much harder to fix. Now, if we want to encourage genuine business activity, that's great, and there's a lot we can do. Actually banning non-competes, making it easier for business owners to save for retirement, and making access for healthcare easier for people who don't get it through their employers. But these things are hard. So with everybody having to either take on a side hustle or start their own business to make ends meet, are we heading towards doing even more than the 9-to-5? Greece introduced a 6-day, 48-hour work week. The country did this at the same time as its European neighbors have been successfully experimenting with shorter 4-day work weeks. But the Greek government has insisted that this new change is the key to turning its economy around by simply working harder than everybody else. It's a bold strategy, and for the sake of working conditions everywhere, we better hope it doesn't work. Unfortunately, it just might. Greece has an aging and shrinking population. According to the country's statistics authority, over 500,000 young, educated citizens left the country to find work with better paying conditions elsewhere. It's very easy for Greek workers to find jobs that pay better in other countries, because as members of the European Union, they are free to reside and work across borders with very few restrictions. In order to correct for this loss of manpower, the government has decided to introduce a 6-day work week to make up for all the workers who have left the country and to support all the elderly people who can no longer support themselves. By raw arithmetic, their logic makes sense. Kind of. Output is the hourly productivity of a worker multiplied by how many hours they work. If Greece has fewer workers, it can increase its output by getting those who are left to work even longer and harder. What they have failed to account for, though, is that a lot of the productive workers still left in the country might decide that they would rather go and work 4 days per week in Belgium for double the average salary than stick it out grinding 6 days a week for half the pay in Greece. If your country has a problem with young people leaving to find better work elsewhere, the solution is probably not to make working conditions even worse. But their new plan argues that by getting on their #grind, they can bring people back by just paying them more. There is also an argument that longer hours tend to be the hallmark of highly compensated professions. C-suite executives, medical practitioners, investment bankers, corporate lawyers, and senior tech workers all regularly put in long hours, and they are all generally well compensated for that time. These professionals are expected to be on call all the time and meet the demands of their clients and patients who simply can't wait. Hospitals have been routinely understaffed and have been relying on staff working longer overtime to keep operations running. These long hours have been linked to unnecessary patient deaths and worker burnout across the country. But doctors and nurses who are willing to stay on call for these odd hours can make an absolute ton of money. Investment banking teams are doing much less important work than medical professionals, and they spread their teams even more thin so that fees on transactions only need to be spread between a few overworked team members. In my own personal investment banking experience, even on very large deals, we never had a team larger than 5 people because managing directors knew that the analysts and associates had to grind it out anyway. And why would they share their bonus with more headcount? If Greece can become the place where people work harder, they should attract these kinds of high-paying jobs, right? Well, not really. Greece already has high unemployment, and anybody who could work in these roles has likely already left to somewhere like London, Frankfurt, or come here to America. For most jobs, there is absolutely no need to be in the office 6 days a week. If you work in an office, you know that you have a set of tasks to do, and once they are done, your new task becomes looking busy for the rest of the week. But that's exactly the point. This law isn't really targeting office jobs. In fact, most of them are explicitly excluded from this law. Instead of magically creating high-paying jobs like promised, what this new law is really about is squeezing the most out of workers on the other end of the pay scale. Retail, transport, construction, and hospitality are jobs where companies just need someone behind a counter or on the tools for as many hours of operation as possible to serve customers periodically. A large share of what's left of the Greek workforce are in these types of roles, and businesses are already demanding a lot of extra hours from their employees. Greece may have a reputation for a laid-back lifestyle and 3 p.m. siestas. But according to data from the OECD, the average Greek actually works a full 80 hours per year more than the average American, and we are already way above average. The average German, on the other hand, works 500 fewer hours every year, and they are still more than twice as productive as workers in Greece. High unemployment has meant that employers can ask a lot from their employees because finding another job is extremely hard, and replacing a worker that isn't willing to work some unpaid overtime is extremely easy. This new 6-day workweek is really being sold as a way to formalize what's been going on in workplaces across the country already. To make matters worse, the wording of the law makes it all sound very optional. DW reports that while the 40-hour workweek is still officially in place, employers are permitted to require staff to work up to 2 unpaid hours per day for a limited period in return for more free time. The problem is that if businesses have the option to ask their staff to work 2 hours of unpaid overtime every day, and those staff can't say no, then that's just going to be the new normal. In the same article, an emeritus professor of labor law is quoted as saying, Law 5053/2023 will kill off the 5-day workweek for good, so it's probably not as optional as politicians would like workers to believe. Some people may leave, but most of those who can already have. Better opportunities exist in other EU countries, but a lot of Greeks don't have the resources to move their families across Europe to compete for a job against a local in a country like Germany. This is about squeezing what is left from who is left. Look, I normally try my absolute best to form a rounded argument that represents both sides when addressing stories like this, but this 6-day workweek is just f***ing dumb. It won't make workers work harder. It won't create high-paying jobs. It won't improve productivity. It will drive away what few young workers the country has left. It will lower hourly wages and create terrible working conditions for the whole country. It's all around terrible policy. But unfortunately, it's not just Greece doing this. It's easy and sometimes even fun to laugh at dumb decisions made by out-of-touch politicians. But the Greek problem is not just a problem in Greece. Greece is a very expensive country to live in because it's so popular with wealthy tourists who make their money elsewhere. But the minimum wage is only 830 euros per month, according to wageindicator.org. That means the average Greek needs the extra work anyway, whether it's legally mandated or not. But let me make a big, bold claim here. Wages haven't kept up with living expenses anymore. Crazy, I know. But the way we are dealing with it is kind of strange. The good news is that the average employee almost everywhere is working fewer hours than we used to in previous generations. According to data from the OECD, annual hours worked per worker have declined significantly since the 1950s. But you would be forgiven for thinking that it doesn't really feel like that. And you would be kind of right. The amount of time workers are spending at work has gone down, but the total number of people has gone up a lot too. Put it simply, what this means is that even though the average individual worker is spending less time on the job, the average household is spending more time working, because it's now much less likely that a woman in the household is a stay-at-home parent. Now, women having the ability to enter the workforce in a meaningful way has been positive progress, but it's also now become a necessity. Having a stay-at-home partner, man or woman, is an unaffordable luxury for most households in America, especially younger workers. This means the average household is dedicating time to more work, and household chores are not taken care of by a single person while another person focuses on work. So while these numbers might look like we are moving in the right direction, the reality is a little bit more complicated. You might have also noticed that the number of people in the workforce is actually going down, but that's largely because as a larger share of our population gets older, some of them can retire while still of working age. This was accelerated by a huge drop at the start of the pandemic when a lot of people who were almost ready to retire were laid off and just never went back to work. This is also great. People should be able to retire and enjoy their twilight years. But with an aging population, this also put more pressure on younger people to pick up the slack. What this means is that there is a bit of a disconnect between what these charts show and what the average worker will experience. According to a study conducted by ADP Research, the average American worker is now doing 9.2 hours of unpaid and often unreported overtime. That is a number suspiciously close to the extra hours that are going to be demanded of Greek workers. The only difference is they were dumb enough to say it out loud. That also doesn't account for the growing number of people working in a full-time role and then doing informal gig work or freelancing on the side. The number of new businesses created in America has exploded in recent years. And while this is normally a sign of a healthy, prospering economy, there might be a little bit more to this data. According to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, 5.5 million new business applications were filed with them in 2023, an all-time high. But suspiciously, these new business applications were coming from the states with the worst employment problems. People are not really starting businesses anymore because they have a great idea and want to capitalize on it. They are starting them to formalize income from informal work like Fiverr, Uber, and yes, even YouTube. According to a Bankrate survey, more than 1 in 3 Americans now have a side hustle on top of their full-time job, and more than 30% of respondents said they expected to need the extra income their side hustle brings in for the rest of their lives. The number of people doing a side hustle jumps to almost 50% amongst Gen Zers and is obviously significantly lower amongst baby boomers who either just have one job or are retired. Picking up a side hustle in addition to your full-time job can be an amazing way to start a business while maintaining the safety of a stable-ish income. I did it while starting this channel, and Richard from The Plain Bagel made an amazing video recently about why he still works his full-time job instead of just focusing on his almost 1 million subscriber YouTube channel. The key difference here is that it was a choice, rather than a necessity. Mr. Bagel is probably doing well for himself with his YouTube channel, but that's not your typical side hustle. Ted Rossman, the credit analyst that ran the survey, said that while it's admirable that so many Americans are putting in extra time and effort into their side hustles, it's unfortunate that most are doing so simply to fund their expenses. This is especially troubling since if side hustles are just a way to increase income as opposed to building up a business or monetizing a hobby, then they are mostly a pretty terrible waste of time. Most people with a side hustle who were surveyed were effectively just working another job that paid well below the minimum wage. So while it looks like the amount of time you spend working has gone down, and you might even be lucky enough to live in a place experimenting with a 4-day work week, we haven't filled that extra time with leisure or just getting a good night's sleep. We have split domestic work, taken on second jobs and side hustles, and just stuck around answering Slack messages off the clock. A lot of us are working 6 days a week. Greece was just the only one to admit it. But go and watch this extended cut video next to see why a whole class of people are becoming basically unemployable. And don't forget to like and subscribe to keep on learning how money works.